As children, we believe our fathers built the world. That Dad can do anything. Dad can fix anything. Dad is the strongest man in the world. My dad could beat up your dad. Timeless and powerful to our childish eyes, looming larger than life or even superheroic. There's kinship there. There's trust, powerful and unique, which hurts all the more when it breaks. The feeling of loss and dejection when he disappears for days or decades at a time. When the superhero you admire is too caught up in his own life and his own problems to teach you about life or love or growing up. Too busy, too distracted, or simply not interested in being your father. Taking a back seat and letting his own father fill in by proxy to be the paternal influence, the source of life lessons, hard work, stoic, unconditional love that we expect from our fathers. A source of jealousy and resentment as he sees his own father being a better father to his grandchildren than he was to him, but feeling that this was the right decision, that he couldn't be a father like his father could be. So his stepping back was justified in a weird way, a selfish way. A selfish parent cannot be a selfless parent. Like so many forks he would encounter on his path of life, he made his decision. But even so, he did not stop caring, and he did not stop loving. Hard to believe from the perspective of a child who finds his father's presence replaced with presents at Christmas and a special birthday dinner. A father is not made by meals and toys and an occasional weekend parking you in front of the Nintendo. It's about time spent, being present. As scared as he was of not being a good enough father, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy, as his distance and engrossment in his own life made it clear to us that we were just another obligation, not a priority. A drain on his time and his money, and a messy presence in a childhood home that no longer resembled home. I had a dream when I was 9 years old, when my siblings and I lived with our mother in our cramped, unheated apartment after the divorce. A random time machine appeared and dropped me on the street in front of my grandparents' house around 1970. There, I discovered my dad as a precocious kid, around my age, playing with others in the neighborhood, trying to fly with balloons around a makeshift racetrack. I don't know, dream logic. But much like Marty McFly, I found myself befriending my own father, and in that dream, I had what I wanted out of that relationship. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about distracting him from his endeavors. It was about being a part of it, being included, spending time together. And I woke up from that dream and stared at the ceiling of that unheated apartment, tracing the glow-in-the-dark stars that my mom had affixed to the ceiling, wishing that there was a way to go back. There is no way to go back. But in his final years, I obtained an approximation of this relationship that I so desired as a dejected child of divorce. He reached out to me after years, perhaps out of desperation, after his brother died and realizing that he had burned every bridge he had. I went to his house, and over the course of 6 hours, he opened up to me for the first time in my life. He was pragmatic and honest. He had nobody left. Nobody in his corner. Nobody who would care if he turned up dead somewhere. About his fears that he had wronged all of us kids so many times that we wanted nothing to do with him anymore. And I explained that despite all the shortcomings, a relationship is a two-way street, and we were sick of being the instigators. If he was willing to reach out to them, as he had been to me, then there was the possibility of building bridges and renewing relationships. But I stand here today as his only attempt. And I hate that. I hate that they didn't get to know him in his final years like I did. Even as sparse as it was, when you spend your life in a drought, even a few drops of rain feels like a flood. But I figure I was the easy choice. The unoffending child. The big helper, the big fixer, the one who cooks and cleans and stacks wood and moves home without asking for anything in return. The one who wouldn't make him answer for the decades away. Or ask him for the answers to difficult questions like why it seemed so easy to walk away time and time again. And ultimately, to be the one who would just take care of it when the end would untimely come. But whether we were on his radar or not, Randy was something to us all. Brother, uncle, cousin, friend, enemy, father. He was our father. Heather, Melissa, Ollie, Ashley. He was younger than Ashley is now when he became a father. Art Garfunkel said, quote, "At 19 or 20, a young man is burning to be great at something. You have a vision that's beyond the neighborhood. You want to make a mark while you're alive. You don't know exactly your future, but you want to be great at it. And greatness is an important word. And you dare not tell anybody how extreme and how burning are your visions because you don't want anybody to mess with them." Unquote. As I said, it wasn't until his final years that he opened up to me about his early hopes and dreams, his insecurities, the forks in the road that led us to this moment, the stumbles that planted the seeds of addiction and self-doubt, likely due to the urging of his therapist who encouraged him to reach out and at least attempt to mend those burned bridges. But he had his demons, and he was working to overcome them, right up to the end. He was introduced to alcohol as a kid of single-digit age at a family wedding, with alcoholic uncles taking great humor in seeing an intoxicated child stumbling about. He shared his vivid memory of my grandfather laying him down in the backseat of the van to sleep it off when he was too drunk to stand. Alcohol became a companion, a crutch, a culprit, and an excuse as the years passed, a scapegoat and a source of admonishment of everything wrong with his life. A demon he would quit, but ultimately resume out of boredom. He adopted my term, boredom beers. It wasn't that he was addicted to the alcohol, it was that life was far too boring without a vice. But as we denounced the alcohol he consumed with often reckless abandon, we paid much less mind to the smoldering stick that served as his closest companion through the majority of his life, and the thing that would ultimately refuse to let him quit, and lead to the majority of his infirmities and his early end. The same cigarettes that aggravated the allergies and asthmatic lungs of my 4-year-old self. I remember those nights, some 30 years later, waking in a panic, unable to breathe, being told to stand on the porch in the freezing midnight air, let out by a waft of that same irritating smoke. I remember sitting on the kitchen counter, sucking down my peace pipe nebulizer treatments every evening, as inhalers alone couldn't keep up with the clouded air. Ironic how moving away from secondhand smoke reduced my asthmatic symptoms to non-issues in my adult life, but all any of us wanted was to have our father around. Well, for our father to want us around. Despite his distance, both physical and emotional, he was a complex man. He was charming, hardworking, and he had an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. But he was also stubborn, hot-headed, and self-serving. He had a fascination with machines and how things worked, and he was an adept problem solver, which served him well as he spent the majority of his working life as a maintenance and repair technician. He knew how everything worked, and if he didn't, he bought a book and he learned. And inspired by his mother, who inspired me as a young, aspiring chef, he was an excellent, if not repetitive cook, gladly eating the same meals day after day until he got sick of them and swore them off completely, until he got to urge to eat them again. Things like garlic spaghetti, stupid cookies, grilled chicken basted with Italian dressing, pan-fried hamburgers coated with Laurie's seasoned salt, the fattiest cuts of pork, steaks so rare that the cow is still mooing, and pinches of raw hamburger seasoned with a dash of salt and pepper. Yum. He mused in one of our last in-depth conversations about an opportunity that appeared in his youth, around the time he finished high school, when he did not take the road less traveled. A chance to uproot from his Vermont adolescence for the burgeoning technical magic of California and Silicon Valley. A call that he declined to take. For that, we owe him our lives. And while he would never know what the other side of that decision would have been, it's a decision that he did not regret making. Growing up, he told us very little about his life, and even now, I only have pieces of a few conversations from the past few years before he died to try and understand who he was in his formative years. Within one of those last conversations, I recall him talking about how hard it was for him growing up as a, quote, gifted, smart kid. He mentioned how he was skipped ahead in school, and how much of a shock it was for him to be, quote, a kid in a sea of grown-ups. But as curious as I was, he didn't speak much else about that time in his life. He was, quote, too smart for the work they were giving him, and it just made him bored, so he stopped caring. Something I can relate to in my own life as a gifted, smart kid. But around the same time, he told me, my grandmother took him in for some sort of academic testing that took the better part of a day. When it was all done, he told me, the administrators sent him off to the side so they could talk to my grandmother in confidence. He remembers that she burst into tears as they were speaking, and from there, they simply left, and it was never spoken of again. He never found out what they were talking about that day and had no idea what the meeting or any of those tests was about. But sitting there at the table with my dad as he told me this, I'm looking at him unsure of whether he's being serious or not, about not knowing what any of that meant. To me, and my unprofessional opinion, it sounds an awful lot like some sort of autism test. But I don't know the year that this happened. The work of Henry Asperger came out in 1944, and my dad's testing would have been either very late 60s or early 70s, so it's hard to say. And as much as I love my grandparents, they were from a different time, when you didn't discuss your shortcomings, and you conformed by any means necessary, so as not to bring shame or disgrace to the family. But with the prevalence of autism present downline from both my parents, it's a distinct possibility that this was the case. But with everyone in that room long gone, we'll never know for sure. Whether he was on the spectrum or just a weird, gifted kid, he was truly one of God's own prototypes. A high-powered mutant of some kind, never even considered for mass production. Too weird to live, and too rare to die. As Hunter S. Thompson would say, a riddle wrapped in a mystery, waving a loaded gun in your face. Much like my mother, my dad never let on that his health was as bad as it was. While I'm sure he did not expect to go as quickly or as rapidly as he did, I feel that he knew his time was short. On August 27th, 2021, he called me after I got out of work in a near panic. He had to get out of here. He had to go to Maine, and it had to be now. It had to be Belfast. He had to go to Young's Lobster Pound, and he needed me to take him. I found the one hotel room left in town for the following weekend. So we left September 4th, a Saturday. We drove to Maine. We didn't use GPS, and he guided us by memory down back roads and side streets the entire way there, pointing out everything that had changed along the way. We checked in. We ate lobsters on the dock at the Lobster Pound while the sun set. He was strapped to his oxygen compressor every second of the trip, and every step was in slow motion. As we got in the car to head home, he muttered under his breath that this was his last trip. But I shrugged it off. We'd come back, I thought to myself, and we'll stay more than a single night, with better planning in advance. We drove down the coastline on our way home, all the way to New Hampshire before cutting across and heading back to Vermont. But not before taking him to a legal weed store so he could go in and buy something new to take home. Classic Randy. I've thought a lot about that trip since he passed. I think whether we are cognizant of it or not, we know deep down when our time is almost up. And his health went down so fast between January and October, I think it took us all by surprise. And I think to some extent he lost a lot of his own drive to keep going after my mom passed away. I think her fight inspired him to keep going and to find purpose in his own life. And seeing me mourning the loss of my mother reminded him a lot of his own struggles in the loss of his mother, something he never truly recovered from. But I mention this only because I think he sensed with his worsening breath that the end was coming, and so was his last opportunity to make a final, meaningful memory with his boy. A picture-perfect day, sharing the things he loved with the one person he had in his corner. Whatever happened after that would happen. But as we sat down to dinner on the sunset-soaked dock, he asked me, the one and only time he ever did, if I was going to take a selfie of us. And I did. And the sunset. And another when he wasn't paying attention. He would never come out and tell me that he wasn't coming back from it. But I think he didn't believe it himself. Who truly believes at 59 that they're going to have to say goodbye and mean it? But whether through the actions of the decisions he made in the few years he got, or by some cruel twist of fate, that's all the time he had. Randy was a surprisingly sensitive soul who was too afraid of his own emotions to let himself feel, or to let his children know in as many words that he loved them. But to my siblings, I can say on his behalf, for what it's worth, he did love you. Heather, Melissa, Ollie, and Ashley. He loved you all more than he knew how to say. But he was too scared, too ashamed, too trapped in an absent envelope of his own creation to say it. He kept cards in his bedside table that I found only the day he passed, that we gave him as kids in our blocky and childish handwriting, saying how much we loved him. But as much as he loved us, he felt he couldn't be the father we needed. And perhaps his mistake was in that he presumed we expected too much. But it was never about toys, or money, or birthday dinners. All we really wanted was his presence, and his time, and his attention. And perhaps for a man so removed from his emotions, that was too much. All we can do is our best, whatever that may be, and our best is good enough. And perhaps his best was walking away. While death has a way of absolving the sins from the sinner, we bring ourselves no benefit or resolve by dwelling on the negatives of a life lived. And whether to the betterment or detriment to those around him, he lived a full and colorful life for what brief years he got on this earth. He was well-traveled, traversing the country from end to end in his truck and on his motorcycle, sleeping on roadsides and in the pickup bed. He made friends everywhere he went, and with his extroverted nature, he was able to make friends with anyone. If you knew him, you probably liked him. If you knew him for a long time, you probably hated him. At least at some point. And if you stuck around long enough, you may have learned to like him again. For all who knew him, loved him, or hated him, he left his mark. A charming renegade with a magnetic personality who either attracted or repelled everyone he met. A painfully smart, overthinking, daydreaming, short-sighted man who could tell you the number of stars in the sky but couldn't be a comfort after a bout of teenage heartache. You will be missed, but your legacy lives on in the intelligent, insightful, hardworking, and passionate children you leave behind. Now go. I'm sure Grandpa Hill is holding the train at the station for you. And Grandma, Alan, Barbara, Donnie, and Wayne are all on board, waiting, alongside countless aunts, uncles, friends, and cousins, to see you at the end of the line. The next adventure is yours. Please bring them our love. Dedicated to Randall Eric Hill, March 18th, 1962 to October 11th, 2021. May you rest in peace. Love you, Dad.
So I guess I'm not sure if there's a good way to end this, but I was gonna dramatically look at Dad's photo, but it's down there. So I'd be like, "How was that, Dad? Did you like it?" But it's not right.
He said it's good enough.
And he'll be like, "Yeah, it's good enough." And he's like, "Okay, time for smoke." All right, so I don't know, how do we finish stuff? Do we like, "Yay"? So let's do a Japanese one. So we go, "Yoi gun." Okay, are you ready? No, well, don't drop him. All right, everyone else we can do it. Ready? Yoi gun. Okay, all right.